Leaders Grieve Last. It allows you to relate to the experience and feel your own pain. It validates grief, encouraging you to weep, mourn, and grieve, but still have hope and move on, to care for someone, and to look forward to our eternal home as you make an impact every single day that God gives you.
Is death of a dear one more painful than their disappearance?
Grief never ends, but it changes. It is a passage, not a place to stay. Grief is not a sign of weakness, nor a lack of faith. It is the price of love.
I'm going to invite 5 individuals to the stage. I will say a little something about them as they come, and each one of them is going to read a portion of the book, just a small portion, and they'll share their thoughts on that particular portion. Our last panelist, is our editor, Miss Ari. Please come to the stage. She refused me to introduce her using her entire CV, but you're very welcome. She's the one who has worked very closely with our author to bring this book to life. So I'm going to invite you to come and take over.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. Thank you for coming to this book launch. My name is Ari Otiti. I am honored to have worked with Justice Chibita on both of his books. Thank you, Your Honor. His first book, Loved by the Best, is still one of my favorite books. And if you haven't read it today, it's on a special firstborn discount. So please get it at the reception. I'm excited about Leaders Grieve Last because it deals with a subject that we find difficult to discuss, grief. The famous 90-year-old pastor Chuck Swindoll said, "Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it." We go through a lot in life, but the quality of our lives is determined by our attitude to what happens to us. Leaders Grieve Last fails to meet the present-day expectation of quick fixes, magical tips, and instant results. It is not a how-to book. It does not seek to answer the hard questions about death or loss. Neither does it provide tips on how best to handle grief. Because if you have ever grieved, you will know that there's no magical fix. It is simply one man's experience with grief, loss, and lots of death. It allows you to relate to the experience and feel your own pain. It validates grief, encouraging you to weep, mourn, and grieve, but still have hope and move on, to care for someone, and to look forward to our eternal home as you make an impact every single day that God gives you. One of my biggest regrets in life is to do with Moses. Moses wanted only one simple thing before he died. I was not able to grant his request. After 2 months in hospital, away from Bowesa, away from his buddies, Mama and Baba, away from his church, Moses asked to be taken home. Unfortunately, he got worse, and we never got to take him back to Bowesa alive. That was my greatest point of regret. I kept thinking to myself, all Moses wanted in life at that point was to go home one more time, just one more time. 3 hours drive to Bowesa, a mere 3 hours, and he would have been home. Yet, we failed to make it happen, and he died with a simple, unfulfilled wish. I learned some valuable lessons from my baby brother, Moses' death. I learned that different people impact our lives in different ways. I learned that no 2 deaths are the same, that one can never get used to death, no matter how many people one loses. Each death brings its own unique sense of loss and grief. It broke my heart to no end, I grieved and wept. Not many people could understand the heaviness with which this unfulfilled wish of my brother Moses weighed on me, but I shared it with Awoli. She understood. The encounter reminded me of a picture I had seen of a Japanese boy carrying a baby's lifeless body on his back during the war. A policeman advised him to just dump the body. After all, the policeman said, the baby was dead. The little boy responded, "He is not heavy. He is my brother." Moses was my brother. He was not expensive. He was not heavy. He was my brother. Although I was keenly aware that the bill had skyrocketed beyond what we could afford to pay off at one go, I discussed with Awoli and we agreed that it was okay. For Moses, we were willing to foot whatever bill was thrown at us. It was definitely not a sound economic decision. We did not have the money at the time, but it was a sound, sentimental, emotional, and human decision. That is all that mattered. Between Moses and money, the choice was very simple. Now I'm about to finish before you think I'll read you the whole book. Maybe I was in denial. Maybe I was just postponing the inevitable. But what I needed most was to get through this tumultuous, sad, and depressing period by all means. Awoli was a strong pillar for me during that time. She looked out for me, reminding me to eat, to drink, to take a bath, to change clothes, to rest, to pray, to reach out to different people. She attended to the children and other family members, and that took a burden off my tired shoulders. Indeed, she was the major reason I stayed sane. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Awoli, Professor Monica Chibita. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the one lesson I would like to highlight: the value of support. Be that rock for someone, carry your Moseses, do all you can for the people you support, but remember, you can't be your own rock. Do not grieve alone. Find that human rock in your life. It may be a spouse, a sibling, or even a friend, and lean on it when you need to. Allow yourself to be carried. Thank you for coming, and I hope you're encouraged to write your own stories.
I'm going to invite a distinguished Ugandan environmental advocate. She's dedicated to advancing climate justice and the sustainable management of natural resources. Professionally, she serves as the managing partner at Kakuru and Company Advocates and executive director of Green Watch, an environmental law non-government organization. Please make welcome with a hand clap, Miss Samantha Atukunda Kakuru Mwesigwa, as she makes her way to the stage. And she's going to be handling a theme called the finality of death.
Thank you very much. I'll be reading from chapter 9. And I will not read the whole chapter, so you can relax. Grieving loss outside family. In addition to our families at home, we soon acquire another set of family members at work. We spend most of our leisure time, meal times, and sleeping times at home, but we spend most of our productive, creative, and formal time at work. In fact, it has been said that most people spend more time at work than at home with their families. Justice Opio Aweri, Justice Kenneth Kakuru, and Justice Stella Arach Amoko passed away while serving as judicial officers. I worked with each one of them at different times. Justice Opio Aweri was a close friend and mentor at the Supreme Court. He gave me fatherly advice from time to time. He encouraged me to plant trees. In fact, he gave me thousands of seedlings and the teak tree, which I duly planted in Buwesa. I went to his village when his mother passed away, well into her 90s. We had hoped He would retire in a few months and enjoy a quiet and peaceful, well-deserved rest. I had hoped he would live longer than his mother. It was a great shock when we heard that he had got a stroke. We visited him at Mulago Hospital, but he was unconscious and could not recognize us. He was all wired up. Before long, he was gone. It was with deep sorrow that we traveled to the same village we had a few months earlier to bid him farewell. Justice Kenneth Kakuru was a colleague in the judiciary and also a brother at Uganda Christian Lawyers Fraternity. He was one of the few people who traveled to South Africa soon after the collapse of apartheid to attend the first ever Advocates Africa conference in Hekport near Pretoria. He was an ardent member and supporter of UCLF. Justice Kakuru had been appointed to the judiciary from private practice, and he made his mark on the Court of Appeal and the Constitutional Court. He died while serving as a judicial officer. He had been diagnosed with cancer, but he managed to get it under control until it resurfaced with vengeance, and he succumbed to its devastating effects. I'm almost done. Justice Stella Arach was a pillar at the Supreme Court. She was soft-spoken and quite the storyteller. She was one of the familiar faces I found. I had first met her when I joined the service as a state attorney at the state attorney's chambers. She was a principal state attorney then, and though we were in the same department, our interaction was limited to discussion of professional work. I saw her at her happiest during the wedding of her son. She asked me to say a few words of counsel to the couple at the reception, and I accepted the honor with gratitude. As colleagues at the Supreme Court, I got the rare glimpse into her more relaxed and unprofessional persona. Her hospitalization and death was so fast. It seems as though one day she was at work, then at home, on bed rest and hospital, and before long, she was dead. I was able to visit her at Nakasero Hospital. At this visit, we chatted a bit, but the second and last time, she was bordering on unconsciousness, so we could not talk. Both times I prayed with her for quick recovery. In my very first year as the Director of Public Prosecution, one of the Assistant Directors of Public Prosecutions, Joan Namazi Kagezi, was shot on her way home from work. She had stopped by the roadside stall to buy fresh fruits and vegetables. A gunman on a motorcycle slowed down and fatally shot her in the neck in the vehicle with her two of her three children. What do you do? What do you say? What do you tell the children? What do you tell the staff? What do you tell the public? There was a funeral service at her church, St. Luke's Church in Tinda. Family, friends, staff, relatives, and the media were in attendance. Eulogies, speeches were made. The killers were condemned. The question on everyone's mind was, who were the killers? Why would they kill a prosecutor who was simply doing her job, whatever the cause of the killing was? I know it can be quite sobering, but we are here to celebrate. So let us, lighten up the mood. I'm here to talk about the finality of death. One of the things that my late father told me, he explained to me, he said, life is a straight line. People jump onto the line and others jump off, but the line continues into eternity. So there's always going to be a line of life and death. So even the Bible tells us, it says, those who sleep in Christ never die. It says, let us not mourn like those who do not have hope, because there's a famous country song that says, this world is not our home. So we are just passing through. So death is not final. It's finality in the physical, but legacies live on. Last week, I visited Bishop Stewart University, and the purpose for my visit is that I was going there to hand over an award that my dad had been giving to the best law student and the best student in theology. So as I was looking for the person responsible to collect the money, I happened to come across the vice chancellor. And the gentleman I was with introduced me to him. And he said, "Oh, I've been looking for you for 2 reasons." He said, 1 is because of your grandfather, and 2, because of your father. So I, humbly waited for him to give me more information. And he told me a whole history about my grandfather. Then he told me about my father. Then he said, "It's good that you're doing this. So do you have a plan to continue with this?" So when I thought about it, I said, it was actually not a final thing, but the actions, the things that we do in our lifetime, the impacts, the legacy, it will always continue. And I know that every single person who has been mentioned in this book continues to have their legacy and are remembered. So I'll leave you with a few scriptures from the Bible that are of hope. The first one is in Revelation chapter 14, verse 13. It says, "Then I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, 'Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works will follow them.'" Their works will follow them in their legacy. The other scripture that I'm going to conclude with is John chapter 11, verse 26, that says, "And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." And these are the words of our Lord Jesus Christ. And he asked the question, do you believe this? So if you do, there is no finality in death. Thank you very much.
Next, I'm going to invite someone I'm privileged to call friend. He's a judge of the High Court from August 2023 to date. Previously, he served as an officer at the Inspectorate of Government for over 2 decades. He's a legal professional. He also holds a postgraduate diploma in legal practice from the Law Development Center in Kampala. He's born again, widowed father of 1. Please welcome Honorable Justice David Makumbi.
I am very humbled that you decided to share this moment, to ask me to share in this moment, especially from the perspective of grieving, because as human beings, all of us, in one way or the other, will have to contend with grief at some point in our lives. And to that extent, of course, Justice Mike Chibita has been a good friend. I've known him long before he even became a judicial officer. And in that sense, there's a lot that we have shared in terms of life. And of course, when it came to the question of grief, we definitely had some points upon which we had some convergence. And I'm honored to stand here today and to just share a little bit of perspective as far as grief is concerned. But first, I'll start by reading a portion of the book. And kindly bear with me, as much as we are here to celebrate. I usually tell people that when I start to show signs of grief, it is because I'm going through allergies. So if you see me having some allergies here, kindly bear with me. The portion in the book that I was asked to read goes as follows. In 1982, my big sister, my closest sibling Alice, died and was buried without my knowledge. Since I was doing my O-level final examinations, I was told later that a decision had been made not to inform me. With no modern communication services, then as we know them today, it was a foolproof plan. It was unlikely that word of mouth would make its way from Buwesa past Tororo, Jinja, Kampala, and reach me up the hill at King's College, Budo, where I was ignorantly and blissfully ensconced in my studies. I'm not sure whether my deepest weeping when I discovered was for the loss of my sister, the fact that she was buried without my knowledge, the betrayal of silence from my family, the knowledge of my insignificance in the whole scheme of things, the realization of the impotence of my father to stop the death, or a combination of all these factors. Was it about the futility of life? Born yesterday, here today, gone tomorrow. For whichever reason it was, I wept uncontrollably, away from the prying eyes of my sister Rosemary, in whose house I was. My tears flowed effortlessly like they had never done before. I felt hopeless and very sad. Part of my anger and frustration was reserved for the doctors who had performed the botched cesarean section that had taken my sister's life. There was talk that it was an intern doctor. How could they leave the operation of my sister to an intern? We always look for someone to blame in the case of death, especially when we perceive as premature, what we perceive as premature, preventable death. We often blame God. If it is a motor accident or a shooting, there is an identifiable person, an object of our blame. If it is natural causes, we may blame the deceased, or the government, or the medical establishment, or our parents for not having done enough. I was invited to speak about a personal experience in terms of grieving for ourselves. A lot of times it is said that when we are grieving for the person that has left us. But in reality, and also from reading this book, it was a reminder that indeed most of the time, the grief is not so much about the person that has gone, but the grief is about the fact that this person is no longer with us. In that regard, personally, when it comes to grief, I wanted to speak about grief from two separate perspectives. First was the loss of my father in January of 2018. It was a sudden death, and it was definitely one that I was not prepared for. But as much as it was sudden, it was something that I could somewhat come to terms with, because in the natural order of things, I knew that my father at some point would have to rest. So as much as I grieved him and I loved him, I did not wrestle as much with that one. 3 years later, in October of 2021, it will be 4 years on the 27th of October, I lost my wife. Now, when it came to my wife, this one was a journey. I'd been married to my wife for nearly 14 years. And right from the word go, literally from the moment we came from honeymoon, we started dealing with the prospect of breast cancer. We went straight from wedding into hospitals. And we fought that battle for a number of years. And at some point, we were informed by the doctors that all was well. But because she was fighting that battle, we also had to put on hold certain things, like starting a family. We had been told before that you have to prepare, maybe do these practices of freeze the eggs, and then later on you can have the child. But we were too busy trying to save life to get into that kind of thing. So at the point when we were assured that she had recovered, That was when we resurrected our hopes and we thought that maybe we can be blessed. It was not easy either, because she had gone through the ravages of chemotherapy, radiation treatment. It was 50-50 as to whether that could even happen. But by the grace of God, we were blessed with a child who was born completely healthy. When the child was born, this was something that we were now thanking God, because we were thinking to ourselves, now this begins the portion of happily ever after. But barely a year after the child was born, my wife started to feel unwell again. Well, not really feeling unwell, but she just felt something strange pushing against her in her midsection. And she kept talking about it over and over. And I told her that, well, you might as well just go and do a routine check, because she had told me she had bumped herself at some point around the same. So I said, go and check. And then when she goes and checks, they do a scan. And they find that now she has some growths on her liver. When she was checked, and they did the biopsy, they found the cancer had come back. And now it was in the liver, which was quite devastating, of course, for her. One of the biggest challenges, and when I talk about grief, for me, the grief started even before, because I began wrestling with the questions. Now, God, you have brought us through. You've even gone as far as blessing us with a child. Now you want this child to grow up without a mother. So we started on the journey again of treatment, and we continued to believe God that she would be healed, That was in about 20. We dealt with that challenge from probably about 2017. It was in 2020, during the lockdown, the first lockdown, that my wife now started showing signs of deteriorating. But by the end of 2020, she had really significantly weakened. And at that point in time, my prayer changed, because I was saying that, God, for me, I'm accepting now of your will. Whichever way you decide, whether you want her to be around or whether you want to take her, I'll surrender to your will. The one thing I only ask you is that, please, if she's going, then do not let her go in despair, because she's believing you. She's really believing you that she'll come through this situation. And at that point, we continued to struggle on. But it was very difficult watching, because you could see somebody, my late wife was a doctor. So there was no sugarcoating it for her. She knew everything that was happening to her in detail. There was no telling her. Sometimes even for me, I would be at a loss of, because you couldn't tell somebody that, no, it's going to be, because she knew in perfect, and I think for me, part of my grief was that the mental torture that she was going through, knowing that there was a finality in the situation that she was dealing with. Inevitably, we had to cross that road. We reached a point where she was too weak, and we went into the hospital. And when we talk about leaders grieving last, one of the big leadership challenges that I had to face, as much as I was dealing with that grief, was on, I believe, the 48 hours before she passed on. And the doctors called us together for a family meeting. And the reason for the meeting was to ask us that, should she go down, do we resuscitate? Now, I was in that meeting with my parents-in-law, And I believe at the time there was also her sister was also present in that meeting. And I kind of like waited because what the doctors had told me was that it is the next of kin, that being me, who has to make that decision. But I was waiting for a cue from my in-laws because I didn't know how I was going to say one way or the other, maybe do not resuscitate, how will they take it? But it was one of those challenges where I knew that now I had to get out of the grieving process and first focus on making a decision, because I realized that as I was looking at them, they were also equally looking at me. And what sustained me in that moment was because shortly before my wife went unconscious, one of the last things she had told me was that, David, it is too much. And because of that, I told myself that I needed to make a decision not just for myself, but also for her. And because she had said it was too much, I told the doctors that as far as I am concerned, and given the kind of person that my wife was, because she was a very lively, outgoing, extroverted kind of person, the kind of person that was lying in that hospital bed was inconsistent with the person that I knew. And even for her, that was not the quality of life that she wanted. And so when she was telling me it is too much, I took it that she was asking also for permission to rest. So at the time she asked me, I told her it is okay. I could not bring myself to say it is okay to go, but I just simply said it is okay. And I believe that from that moment, because shortly after that, that is when she simply went to sleep, and from that point she was quite oblivious to the world around her. I had to make the decision. I prayed to God that my in-laws would not misunderstand me, but they also, at the end of the day, they appreciated. Because for them, and I sympathized a lot with them, because there is no parent who wants to see their child go before them. But that was the kind of challenge that they faced. And because of that, I realized that it was also going to be a problem for them to make that kind of decision if they had to say, do not resuscitate. For a parent, I don't think there is any parent here who can easily say, do not resuscitate my child. So in that sense, I had to take that responsibility. After she rested, the other challenge now was in terms of having to go and have explained to my son why his mother went to hospital and did not come back. I had to suspend my emotions because I went to the child thinking that the child will not understand. At the time, he was 6 years old. I thought he would not understand. But he understood enough to know Mommy went to hospital and she will not be coming back. And because of that, the boy wept like an adult. And in that moment, my heart was broken into so many pieces, but I had to be brave for him. Because he needed to know that everything is going to be okay. And because of that, that also set me off on a journey of trying to understand, but God, a lot of times when we are dealing with this kind of grief, we are asking what good can come out of the fact that a child has lost his mother? Because that's the encouragement that I was continually getting. And I was saying that, no, this is hollow encouragement. You're not the ones who are there to see when my child is going through, for example, the separation anxiety because he's wondering whether his father will go away and not come back. Where is the good that can come out of that? But eventually, what I can testify to is that God started to speak to me and helped me to understand that in losing people, God had already known long before each of us was born. Each of us has an allotted number of days, and that cannot change. And the fact that he brought my wife Carol into my life, he knew that at day X, eventually he would call her home. And because of that, he had also made plans, he had arranged. He knew that he could sustain me through that difficult period. And the encouragement that I got from it is that even as a leader, when you're putting aside your grief in order to handle the practical things, God is more than able to take your grief and use it to encourage others. In the case of Justice Chibita, when I read this book, I could not understand how, you can go through back-to-back challenges, see so many siblings leave this earth, all in one lifetime. But I also began to understand that God knew that your siblings would be around for a particular number of years or days. And he knew that out of that challenge, he would use you now to speak to so many others. And that, for me, was what started to form a personal experience. Actually, when Justice Chibita told me about this book, I told him, "You've beaten me to it." Because I've been also dragging my feet, trying to see how I can put together my own thoughts and my experience as far as my dear wife was concerned. So I thank God when I see this kind of story, because my challenges and seeing somebody like my senior, Justice Chibita, weather those storms up to this point and see where the Lord has taken him, also gives me encouragement that my story is not yet done. And as I conclude, maybe the one other thing that I would want to share is that grief is not something that should be treated as alien, that it should be done away with. It should be dealt with as quickly as possible and gotten out of the way, and you move on. I liked somewhere in this book where Justice Chibita was talking about how everything is regulated. There is law and regulation for everything. But one of the things he states in his book is that there is no regulation when it comes to grief. Meaning that for each and every one of us, we grieve differently. And the fact that we grieve differently should also be respected. The fact that somebody is able to grieve and in 1 week they are able to move on, praise the Lord, good for them. But there are others for whom it may go on for quite a long time, and it is not because they are weak. I will conclude by just sharing a small quote. I do not know, I can't attribute this quote to anybody. I just came across it on social media during the process soon after my wife died. But I found it to be a very, very valid and encouraging quote. It goes, "Grief never ends, but it changes. It is a passage, not a place to stay. Grief is not a sign of weakness, nor a lack of faith. It is the price of love." So I thank you very much for listening to me. That, in a nutshell, was just my own personal experience in terms of grieving for myself when it came to the whole process that involved both my father and my late wife. Thank you so much.
And next, I'm going to invite the Principal Personal Secretary, Office of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. She is a relative to our author, and she's a very dear friend of the Mugoya family. Her sister Irene, if you've read the book, was mentioned in the book that we are launching today. Please welcome, with a hand clap, Zipporah Mayanja.
I'm reading chapter 4 of this wonderful book, Grieving the Missing Part. It is page 31. In this world, we tend to compare. It is a coping mechanism. Even in pain, we compare. Is death of a dear one more painful than their disappearance? I'm not yet sure how to answer that question. Death is final, and there is no closure. With disappearance, there is always hope that the person is alive somewhere. The major issue to deal with is the absence and lack of closure. Just a permanent state of hope and despair, all wrapped up in one. In both cases, however, grief exists, since grief is about loss of what we cannot have anymore. John is our parents' third child. He went missing in 1997. As of writing this book, April 2025, we have not heard from him, about him, or of him. Benezeri, our eldest son, who was 4 years when John disappeared, studied, completed university, got married, and has a son. Nobody can say whether John is dead or alive. We can only believe that he is alive. To put his disappearance in perspective, the following people have died since John disappeared: Apofia, Uncle Yefsa, Mama Dembe. Then there are the siblings, Moses, Harriet, and our parents. Considering all the family members who have died, there is no need to deem one dead when there is no conclusive evidence to that effect. This kind of loss poses its own version of grief. The person is lost, physically absent. There is no closure. Closure is where you know for sure that the person died. We mourned, wept, and grieved. We buried, and there is a grave to show for it. Matter closed, in a manner of speaking. In the case of John and hundreds of other people in that category, you can live with the hope that the person was never seen dead and buried, and therefore that person must be alive somewhere in God's wide world. Yet, 1 year passes, then 5 years, then maybe 10 years. Hope begins to give way to despair, and emotional exhaustion sets in. Loss of hope and despondency start to reign supreme. This is a unique kind of grief, or suspended grief, endless grief. The issue of John gnawed at Baba every time I came to Buwesa. He would ask me, "Have you heard from John?" "No, I have not, but I'm in touch with his wife, Janet." "Does she say she has heard from him?" "She has not heard from him, but he must be somewhere, and I believe he will appear soon." Okay. Our family experienced a similar situation. No, we are still going through it, because my sister, Irene, she's in this book, disappeared many years ago. And up to this day, we ask the same questions. Where is she? Is she alive? Is she dead? Was she buried? Was she just thrown and eaten by animals and everything? So that is something that we'll always, I think we'll always live with. And we have lost siblings, our brother and sisters, our sister-in-law, nieces, grandchildren, and our own father after the disappearance of our sister. And most recently, last year, we lost a sister who had been battling with sickle cell disease since she was born. We all knew, I think we had started to learn some medical terms because she would always have blood transfusion. She would be on drip for one reason or another. And it was hard from when she was a child, but she lived a good life. Our parents were always together with them, and we all took part in her treatment. She was married, she had children and grandchildren. But from 2020, her condition deteriorated. She got heart failure and she was suffering from all sorts of things. Every other day we were in hospital for one reason or another. But the most difficult time came, of course, when she passed away. By the way, she lived to be 60 years, which is very rare among people who have this condition. Now, our mother is old, 92, and she at that time she was in Butareja, in our village in Kangalaba. Now, Anne passed on like 4 days after our uncle, our mother's brother. We had just told her that her brother has passed on. Then on a Monday evening when Anne passed on, I was tasked again with the duty of calling her to inform her about this. Up to now, I hear the scream. She's old and frail and everything, but that day she screamed and I hear it even up to now. But we thank God that we are still managing with all these challenges. Thank you.
And then our final panelists are a couple. I'm going to invite them to come and they'll be talking about God's sovereignty in the midst of death. I'm going to invite Mrs. Joyce Rose Wandawa. Please come. She is a graduate of Macquarie University, Wheaton College, Illinois, where she did her MA. She's also head of education support services at Grand Rapids Christian Elementary School, Michigan, for 4 years. Currently, and for the last 7 years, she's head of primary learning support at Rainbow International School, Uganda. Welcome. You can have a seat here. All right. And she is married to our final panelist, Dr. Philip Wandawa. Together they have 2 children. Please come, Doctor. Doctor currently is a principal at Kampala Evangelical School of Theology. He provides executive oversight for the School of Theology, whose vision is a church that is Christ-like in character and witness, and a society that is being transformed by the values of the kingdom. Welcome to the stage.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, protocol observed, sorry. I am nervous, can you tell? Justice Mike Aboli, thank you for this opportunity. My husband and I are going to read. We were assigned a text, and rather than each reading the same text, we'll take turns. After you, sir.
I thought we agreed. We're reading, I think, from page 140 at the bottom, last paragraph. I met Simon Peter Muhammad, a staff of Bible Society of Uganda, when I was on the committee of Scripture Union. Scripture Union was seeking to fill the position of Secretary General, and Simon Peter emerged best candidate. I was asked to meet him and offer him the job. We met at Katikati restaurant in Lugogo, and in many words, I offered him the job. He accepted the offer to tendering his, he accepted the offer subject to tendering his resignation at Bible Society and serving the requisite notice period. He got back to me a few days later indicating that his resignation had been rejected. Shortly thereafter, he was offered the job of General Secretary of the Bible Society of Uganda and duly appointed. I was not surprised that the Bible Society had woken up to the reality that a sister organization was on the verge of poaching one of their best. Scripture Union had to go back to the drawing board. I congratulated Simon Peter upon his appointment and moved on. As a judge, it is best practice to avoid sitting on boards to reduce chances of conflict of interest and unnecessary public interaction with the public. So it was that when I was appointed judge, I stepped down from all boards I was sitting on.
A few years after our first encounter, Simon Peter Muhammad asked to meet me. His mission was to convince me to join the board of Bible Society of Uganda. We went through the pros and cons, and I told him about the fear I had of conflict of interest. We agreed to compare notes with each other after praying over the matter. I eventually joined the board. Justice Ezekiel Muhanguzi was president. When he served out his term, I became president. The president has one major role: to chair the annual general meeting. The rest of the year, the president represented and promoted the organization at ceremonial events. Bible Society is a very unique society that brings together the various Bible-believing denominations. Simon Peter was great at his job, raising funds for various projects, translating, selling, and giving away Bibles. Perhaps his major undertaking was the construction of an 8-story Bible house to replace the existing one in Bat Valley, Bombo Road. I had never met anybody who effortlessly raised money for a cause like Simon Peter. There was something special about him and fundraising. It was a combination of innocence, passion, and honesty. He mobilized people, resources, and funds, and he got assurance that in December 2023, the house would be presented as a Christmas gift to members. Can you read the final bit?
On the evening of Thursday, 11th May 2023, the chair of the board, Reverend Father Dr. Richard Mark Sajabi, called to tell me that Simon Peter was admitted in Mengo Hospital. I planned to visit him there the following day, Friday. When I woke at 5 a.m. on Friday morning, I started seeing messages announcing Simon Peter's death. I was shocked to hear the news, which would have been worse if I had not been informed the previous day that Simon Peter was admitted. He was just over 50 years of age and had accomplished a lot, but had plenty to fulfill with the Bible Society and his family. He had just handed out invitations to his wedding anniversary celebrations. It turned out that the day he and his wife Ruth were meant to celebrate their anniversary is the day he was buried. What an irony.
Yeah, what an irony. I remember that morning. I didn't have many chances actually to interact with Simon Peter Muhammad. I knew him, and we did meet not too long before that, I think, on a farewell thing for Paul Busson, I believe, who is in the house today. And but an anniversary, yes, actually the anniversary. So I knew, but I also knew the work he was doing. So even though I didn't talk to him on a one-to-one basis, I knew what he was doing. And when I heard the news, I was really shocked. Actually, I'm the one who told my husband. He's like, "What?" And it just struck me. It just seemed so senseless. I mean, you just thought about the futility of life, and I thought, who benefits from this? I'm switching now to the reason I think we were asked to share. I did thank you for the opportunity. To be honest with you, I fought it for a long time. I told him I wouldn't do it and he could represent us. And yeah, but then I remembered a promise we made. We lost our son 5 years ago. When we were writing our bios for the MC, I wrote the last line was, "We have 2 children." And when my husband wrote his, and he read what I'd written, he said, "We have 2 children. How about Jonathan?" That was yesterday. We lost Jonathan 5 years ago. And here I was having to gently tell my husband, yes, he's there, but we have 2 children. And so I said to him, so he wrote something like, they're married, he's married, no, that was his part. He's married to Joyce Wandawa, and they now have 2 children. So I said to him, look, that's something you say of a young couple. They now have children, and they will probably be getting more. They're just starting a family. And he graciously withdrew that, and I think sent her a revised edition of sorts, which said they have 2 children. The reason I'm bringing this up is because ours is a different story. And even before I go into that, I would just like to say, Justice Mike, in your book, you talk about the power of a support network and how that can mitigate grief to some extent. And there are many in this house who stood by us when we lost our Jonathan. And we can never, ever thank you enough. There are many of you in here who still stand with us, and we thank you. So ours was a different kind of story. The kind of story you want to bury under the carpet. The kind of things that a culture like ours here chooses to not talk about. I know that in the West, people will talk about that. In this culture, you don't talk about the kind of death our son did. We agreed, right, even before we buried him, right at the funeral, that we would tell it as it is. Our son suffered from mental illness. And we did everything that we thought was best to save his life. And I know that's the other thing you address in your book. Sometimes it helps when you've cared for somebody and you kind of begin to think, There was a time we thought Jonathan was we didn't take self-harm past him. We did take him to hospital. We were at Nakasero Hospital. We saw counselors, psychologists. We engaged a private psychologist. We got to a point where we thought, okay, people like us don't like to talk about Butabika Hospital. We got to a point where we realized we needed to take him there. And something happened that touched me then and still does. When Jonathan was at Nakasero Hospital, he had a lot of cousins who just, can I go stay with him? And we did that. When it was time for Jonathan to go to Butabika Hospital, I said to my husband, so should we get a relative to go and be with him? And Philip said, no, I'm going to be with my son. Now, many of you will know that when you visit hospitals around here, you usually find women taking care, the attendants, abajanjabi as we call them. My husband, principal of Kampala Evangelical School of Theology, Dr. Philip Wandawa, said he would take care of his son. And he was the mujanjabi. Thank you. I don't take that lightly. So he stayed at the hospital for 2 weeks, and I would go to work. It was a tough time. I teach at Rainbow International School. I would go every day. Then at the end of the day, I would get back home and get food and drive to Butabika Hospital. Sometimes I would leave like at 9, 10 or some very wicked hour, get back home knowing that I had to be up to be at school by 7:15. That's when I usually have to report at school. But that Philip offered to take care of Jonathan and be the mujanjabi, that was huge. It's still huge. Okay, sorry, I didn't intend to get into the long version of it, but Jonathan did recover, or so we thought. And let's just say the last 2 months, like 8, 9 weeks of his life, were the happiest we'd ever seen him. He just was bubbly and excited and committed his life to Christ, and the prayer time at home became a big deal, so big sometimes I would think, I need to go to bed, I have to go to school. And it would just go on and on and on. He was just full of life. When it didn't make sense when Jonathan took his life. When we went to visit his counselor, his psychologist, who had actually discharged him, when we went for counseling sessions after, you could tell that he too, he got played just like the rest of us, he and his team, because they believed that Jonathan was beyond self-harm. They had believed that. Questions, so many questions then, so many questions now. And the guilt trips and wondering, is there anything that we could have done? What did we do? Where did we go wrong? And to be honest, we searched, and it seems like we felt like we did the best we could for him. That day he asked to get his glasses changed. His dad took him to see an ophthalmologist. I went to a hairdresser's like ladies do. And I remember they came to check on me. And I remember he stayed in the car and he smiled and waved, and I almost got up to go, and I thought, oh well, I'll see him later. But that's the picture that I always have of him, smiling, waving, looking as handsome as could be. I remember on one occasion talking to somebody, well, on many occasions I have, but on this particular one, it took somebody who's a self-declared atheist to say, because I was like, but he was at his worst and nothing happened. We were kind of ready for anything, and he went beyond that. And then he was at his best, and then this, and then she said, but Joyce, can you imagine how you'd feel if all your memories of him were just the gloomy, angry, sad, whatever? And she was right. I realized that God had given us those months, those last couple of months, to just see the best there was in our son. Yes, regrets. Your regret for Moses was not being able to take him home. This seems a bit silly for Jonathan, but Jonathan had just turned 20, and it was during COVID. He, which is probably part of his frustration, he was admitted at Calvin University, which is where I got my Master of Education in Special Needs. And he was excited, but then he was upset because he couldn't go, and he was frustrated and all that. But at his birthday, we got cake. We ordered cake. I think it was from CJ's, not the Chief Justice, but at Cafe Java's. And we thought we got a really lovely cake, and then a day after, I said, "Mom, can you make your carrot cake?" He loved carrot cake. That was his favorite. And I thought, we spent so much money to buy this. You want my cake? So I promised him that I would make carrot cake. It was a busy time, and he asked me again about a week later, and I said, I'll make it, and I was planning to make it. I never did. And it seems like a silly thing, but to quote your words, all he wanted was cake made by his mother. And I promised, and I didn't do it. A friend advised, after about a year of because I decided I would never ever make that cake again. I would make others, but not that carrot cake. And then a friend said, what if you make cake on his birthday? And then you will have made it. And actually now, since then, every 9th of August, we do carrot cake. I renamed that recipe Jonathan's Carrot Cake. And it's always a hit with everybody who tastes it. Anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take all your time. But a lot has happened, and like I said, the questions are still there. Just like we asked that when Simon Peter Muhammad was like, really? God, now? I mean, really? It just didn't make sense. We think about our son, 20 years old, just budding, really, really smart, just ready for life to open up, and then, and yet, he remains God. It doesn't mean that he loves us any less, doesn't mean that he's punishing us, doesn't mean there are all those things that we like to think, that maybe there, he is God. And it's just what it is. His ways are beyond us. And we believe that Jonathan is in a better place. We believe that he was genuine when he accepted God. We don't know what happened that day. He was happy and then he wasn't. We don't know. But we know that God has not forsaken us and does not change who he is. It does not change what he sees, how he sees us. I think I'll let my husband take over from now. So thank you for listening.
Yeah. My wife wears a prosthesis, and sometimes it weighs her down, so she's free to go and sit down, and instead of subjecting her. But thank you, sweetie, for help. The other comment, though, is not probably as kind. I think that I was almost going to say it was malicious of you to give us a topic such as this, the sovereignty of God. We all know there are no formulas. There's no rational, there's no way you can put the sovereignty of God within, in reason, because it transcends reason. As human beings, we always try to put things in a box that we can understand. And something about the sovereignty of God defies that. And why you would inflict us or me with that question, I don't know. You've just heard the story of our son, and we had many struggles with our son in that journey that we had. And I remember at some point, my son, I think, or our son was, there were many things, right from, say, about maybe age 17 and onwards, that he was struggling with. Some of it was coming, partly an identity crisis. And now, talking about sovereignty, you wonder, I keep wondering whether maybe if COVID hadn't happened, maybe things would have gone differently. Because clearly one of the things he struggled with was that he was unable to proceed to university, that he wanted to go and study in the US, and he had been admitted, and he couldn't, and wouldn't. Of course, it took a while for even the US to open up to have students physically. And so that was one of the challenges for him. But talking about the sovereignty of God, one evening, I think we were at table and having dinner, and my son declares to me that he no longer believes in God. He's an atheist. And so what do you say to that? I'm a preacher. Besides, I'm a principal, but I do speak in church. I'm invited to speak, and I teach. We teach pastors. We train and equip pastors. And here my son was telling me he doesn't believe in God anymore because he had grievances. He could not reconcile that God would allow certain things to happen in his life. And we didn't break out into a fight and shouting, how can you do that? How can you embarrass me? Because faith is personal, and my son has the right and the liberty to freely believe or not to believe. That's something that's one thing about the sovereignty of God, that in his sovereignty, he has created us creatures with a free will, and therefore capable of making choices, even choices against him. How do you reconcile that? Shouldn't he be controlling everything? Predetermined so that no one would be able to make a decision or have a thought that is contrary to him? It has not pleased him to create that kind of world. And but I did engage him because part of what as we train pastors, one of the areas is apologetics. How do you defend the Christian faith? How do you help people who are struggling, who have questions, troubling questions about Christian faith? And there may be some people here who, because of life experience, you may be at that point where you are wondering whether your faith or Christian faith is worth it at all, because things just don't match up. So my son quotes back at me a sermon I'd preached in church. I'd preached a series of sermons based on the problem of pain, the problem of suffering, which is every human age deals with that. All of us individually deal with pain, with suffering, one or the other. And that problem has engaged human beings down history in philosophy and theology, and other cultures. There are even sayings and about it. Now, I preached and I presented it. One of the ways it has been presented in Christian history is a trilemma. If God is all-powerful, if God is all-loving, then why is there suffering? Why is there death? Is it because he's powerful but he's not loving? Maybe he's kind of privately sadistic. He enjoys people suffering. Is God, loving, but actually maybe he's well-intended, but he's not powerful enough to control everything. But if God is truly what the scripture present him to be, as we who are Christians believe, sovereign, loving, then why? And I know that we are going to still be asking that question. All the saints down the road have asked that question. And I think that one of the things I like to say at the very beginning, most of this is also my journey, by the way, not just theology, is that God's sovereignty is coincident with his love and with his wisdom. It coincides. Now it's hard for us to see how can something that is seemingly wrong from every angle still be okay. How could it be that Joseph, for those of you who read the Bible, the Old Testament, his brothers would commit a heinous crime of selling their own brother into poverty, into slavery. But that act, which was evil in itself remaining evil, is still an act that God used down the road to save the nation of Israel. Because when the family of Jacob was in jeopardy of starving to death, they had to move to Israel, and they found only to discover that their young brother, who they had sold and actually presumed dead, and we've heard from stories here how there are people who are presumed dead or alive. Let's put it that way. I think Justice Mike and his family prefers to remember John or think of John as still alive somewhere. But their brother is the one who saved them, the one they sold into slavery, the one they intended to kill. How do you rationalize, put that into a rational framework, or even a justice framework? I know there are quite a few justices here. So God's sovereignty is coincident with his wisdom and his love. It's just that when we are going through these moments, we do not seem to see the justice, neither do we see the love. God remains kind of inscrutable, sovereign, and kind of beyond our experience, and yet God has come to us through his Son, Jesus Christ, who lived our life, he came into history and became one of us, and lived and walked and lived a normal life like any other human being, and allowed himself to die. As impossible as that sounds, he did not. It wasn't an accidental, unfortunate death. He allowed himself to die because that was the way of salvation, which he and his Father had decided would be the way we would be saved. So he submitted to death. Now, tell me if that one makes sense. But we are here and speaking, hopefully, because of that. So my comments are not going to be like a coherent sermon or anything like that. These are comments born out of experience, born out of my own journey. Still walking that journey, by the way. And that's why that little, what she shared at the beginning, when I saw what she had written about her bio, it says, we have 2 sons. And I said, no, but Jonathan's still there. He's with the Lord, and he's still my son, even though he's gone, even though he's not physically here. But I think of him as he is, and therefore, I think we agree that we are doing this in honor of Jonathan. That we thank Justice Mike for including us, so that we can, through this, speak about our son. And she has shared a little bit of his faith, his fervent faith just before he passed. Suffering and pain, and my brother who lost his wife, what's the name of it? David. David made a statement about, when confronted with his son having to tell the story, that his mother has died, and talks about, he said, hollow encouragement. What kind of encouragement is that? One of the things about the sovereignty of God is that God is sovereign unquestionably, and there's no competition. Because of all the beings that are, he's the only one who is the source of life. He's the one who holds everything in his hands. He's incapable of being threatened. So he's not insecure. So even when we ask this, if you read Job, Job asks profound questions. He confronts God, and basically says, isn't he being irreverent? God can take it. Yes, in your sorrow, in your grief, in your anger, in your outrage. And sometimes situations happen which cause us, we are outraged by what's happening. How can this happen? Yes, we do that because God has created us with a sense of justice, with a capacity for love, for care. And so, therefore, certain things are just outrageous, just immoral, just unacceptable. When we react like that, we are actually, in a way, reflecting part of the image of God. And sometimes what the image of God is in us is better than the way we behave. Because very often our behavior, our conscious decisions and choices we make do not live up to the sense of justice and what's right, which we feel in our own souls. So you have permission to ask those questions. You have permissions to say, when you say it's kind of hollow encouragement, yes, it does seem hollow encouragement. But we have permission in God himself. There's room in God. God can take it. God can take the fire. That's why even the way we responded to our son, we didn't try to force him to come back to the Lord, prayer of repentance. We just knew that he's going through, he's at that point in his life, and he's completely dissatisfied with everything, and there's no way we're going to force it down his throat. But he's still our son. We made sure that he still knew we loved him. He didn't have to be seemingly faithful to God in order for us to love him. Our love for him was unconditional. So we did not bother him about it. We did not keep peppering him or forcing him into Bible study. Or forcing him to go to church or do those quote unquote spiritual things. No, because he was at an age where he needed to come to faith. He needed to own the faith which he had been introduced to by his parents. The faith which is the faith of his parents had at some point to become his faith. But that process was his and his alone, and we had to respect that. Just like God respects us. God doesn't force us to believe in him or to do what he wants us to do. He wants us to come to that, to those decisions independently. One of the, I would say, friends I'd like to introduce you to, for you to walk with, is Job. How many of you read the book of Job? Yes, the book of Job has been my friend for a long time. And even in the last 2 years, the book of Psalms as well. Sometimes when I don't have words to say, when I can't form prayers which express the desire of my soul, I find that some of the things are already expressed. The scriptures do express them. But one of them that strikes me is Job in chapter 10, verse 8 onwards, up to 12. He says, "Your hands shaped me and made me. Will you now turn around and destroy me? Remember, you molded me like clay. Will you turn me to dust again? Did you not pour me out like milk and cuddle me like cheese? Clothe me with skin and flesh, and knit me together with bones and sinews? You gave me life and showed me kindness. And in your providence, you watched over me. I mean, Lord, you did this. You've taken care of me. You're responsible for my being here. Now, why are you letting these things happen to me, to devastate me? And Job asked all sorts of questions. The answer is in the journey itself. The sovereignty of God is unquestioned. I mean, we can hit against it. We get angry. We throw tantrums. And by the way, God is big enough and loving enough to contain those tantrums. He's our nearest kinsman. He knows we're made of flesh. That's another psalm that talks about that. God knows us intimately. Ultimately, it's a journey of self-discovery. Discovering both how wonderfully and fearfully we are made, but also discovering our limits, how fragile we are. How can creatures so fragile as we are still be able to do the things that we do? Ultimately, life is an incredible gift. An incredible gift. It's an incredible gift that Justice Mike, he's able to pen a book, write his story of what is actually a common experience. But here we are all listening because we share in that journey of grief, in that journey of pain. I want to bring this to a close. As you know, I don't want the preacher in me to jump in. My apologies. Yeah. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. In all things except nothing. Nothing is excluded. Is your faith, such that you are able to kind of bear the things that are happening to you or that have happened to you? To be stretched the way, you are being stretched or will be stretched. Is your faith deep enough? This is what this scripture actually is saying. That we can face life, we can face whatever it is. I mean, look at Brother David's story and his wife. I mean, kudos to Brother David for standing with your wife, for being a husband, for letting the love of Christ, Christ be the model. Husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church. How much did he love the church? He died for it in order to cleanse her. But we know that in our culture, very often, when a woman falls sick and she's unable to provide the services that men expect, men decide to find that in the meantime, I need to find somebody to meet my needs. It happens all the time. Christ-like perseverance, the selflessness, because that's what we need love to be. I am a contradiction myself, because often I feel like this is too much. I can't do that. That is too demanding. I mean, and yet at the same time, I'm expecting that my wife, my friends, my people will be committed to me. They will be there for me all the time. but I'm not ready to do the same. That's why Christ remains our model. So the sovereignty of God for me is still a journey. There's no question that He's sovereign. There's no question that He's in charge. In fact, it is the ground of hope. One of the most amazing things about the story of Job, in spite of his friends accusing him and guilt-tripping him and trying to explain, trying to fit a round peg into a square hole, he remained, his belief in the sovereignty of God never waned. And if you give up on the sovereignty of God, then there's no way you're able to deal with what life is going to throw at you. May the Lord richly bless you.